Hi, I'm Andy Murphy at Dunster House Limited, and I'm here today to show our customers how to install twisted or warped timber. Now, timber is a natural material. It will twist or warp to a degree as part of the properties of that natural material, and it is an unavoidable process. But there are ways to certainly overcome twisted timber and be able to install it without any issues with your cabin, and so that's what I'm here to show you today. Our company has very good processes and procedures in place to keep the amount of warping to a reasonable minimum, but nevertheless warping does occur, and the purpose of this video today is to show you how to deal with various different types of warping. So in order to do that with this particular cabin, instead of going through the normal checking procedures that we have, we've actively selected different types of warped timber in order to be able to show you how to deal with those. As I say, you will have some warped timber within your cabin most likely, but you are very unlikely to have as much warped timber as I'm going to show you here today. So I have a good selection of twisted and warped timbers here, which I want to be able to show you. First of all, if we have a look down the length of that timber, you should be able to see that in the middle of the timber it's actually bowing upwards. Now with this type of timber, it's probably best to put it towards the bottom of the cabin so that the weight of the cabin is going to help to push the timber straight. And next we have a twisted piece of timber, which as you can see is twisted along the length of it. This is best to put probably somewhere in the middle of the cabin. You could put it somewhere at the bottom. It shouldn't be too critical actually, so long as what you're trying to do is either put it against another twist which is going in the opposite direction, or better yet, sandwich it between two straighter boards which are going to help to straighten it out. This is a bowed section which is curving from left to right, I think you can see along the camera there. This is not too critical where you put it, to be honest. I would probably avoid putting it next to windows and things like that perhaps. But essentially, because there's a tongue and groove running along the top and the bottom edge, of course, by the time you push it straight and knock it down to the timber that's below it and another timber goes above it, those two other timbers, providing of course that they're either bowed in the opposite direction or are a straighter board themselves, should help to straighten up this board as well. We're now onto the building process, and of course we're going to start by putting together the bearers. If you do have twisted bearers with your cabin, you'll find that the easiest way perhaps to straighten them out is to put the paired up bearers together. You'll have two bearers together at the front of the cabin, you'll have two bearers together at the back of the cabin that you screw together with 50mm screws. When you put those two together, if you find two twisted timbers that you can put together to help straighten them out, then screw them together, you'll find that that is an easier way of doing things perhaps. You then also put the half log on top of those bearers as well, and so that if it's twisted you can help to straighten that up whilst you're putting it onto the bearers, or indeed it can help to straighten the bearers as well. So as it happens, our bearers are not particularly twisted, but they do have a bit of a bow in them, which is fairly pronounced. When I'm lifting this up to this degree, it is actually lying flat on the other end, and the other bearer here actually, it has the same sort of bow, which again when I'm lifting it up that sort of amount, it's actually lying flat at the other end. So there's a fair amount of bow to them, and these are very simple to straighten out. I'm going to put one in one direction and put one in the other direction, and as you can see there's obviously a difference along the line there, and I'm going to screw them together. I'm going to screw the two ends together first, and then I'm going to push it together in the middle in order to straighten it out. Okay, so as you can see, that bearer has obviously now straightened out. One is working against the other in order to give me a fairly straight bearer. I've screwed both pairs of front and back bearers together now, so they're now reasonably straightened up. I've also actually screwed down the half logs as well at the front and back as well. Now with my particular half logs, they're actually quite straight. I have done a previous video showing how to straighten those up, which I might splice in at this point. But also, if you're just putting the screw at each end, if there was a bow in the middle, if it was coming out at an angle like this. It is similar with the bearers, just a question of pushing it into place, holding it into place, and putting a screw down into it to hold it once it's in the correct place. Now, another quick little tip is, rather than trying to line up all your bearers individually, perhaps to get your bearer, to get the floor square, you may find it a lot simpler to do as I've done, which is to screw the bearers together, screw the half logs onto it as well, and then get the full logs and slot them into position. And then once you've slotted those into position, of course, it's that much easier then to be able to check the diagonals and to move the sides around. If, for example, that was a longer diagonal and that was a shorter diagonal, I'd have to pull this back in that direction in order to get the diagonals of the cabin correct and get the base square. I've now checked that the diagonals are the same, and so the bottom wall logs of the cabin are definitely set out in a square fashion. They're at 90 degrees in the corners. I've now then referred to the instructions, of course, to make sure that I'm getting the correct measurements between the bearers, and the quickest way that I've found to then set out the bearers is to go and pre-drill all of these at the correct measurements, put the screws into them. All of my bearers at the moment are just lying loose between those points, but I've set them all out between those points, and I'm just going to screw in at the end of each of those bearers. Now, these bearers really aren't very twisted at all, so they're not great, unfortunately, for the purposes of this video, but the self-same thing applies. If it was a more twisted piece of timber, I would still be screwing it at both ends and straightening it as I go along, and then as you put the floorboards in, that's the point at which you're going to straighten out the bearers, basically. If you have any that are twisted in the middle, you can just pull them or push them to one side slightly as you're knocking the floorboards into place, and the nails that are holding the floorboards are then going to hold the bearers. So I shall get on with screwing these into place now. Okay, so now we're on to building the main walls of the cabin. So what you need at this point is 2 sets of clamps, 2 sets of hammers, and 2 people. So we'll now get on with building the wall. Now, I've arranged the back wall as the most twisted bearers, and very briefly I'll just explain the order in which I put those, in case, of course, it's of interest. I've started off with my bridge timber first, which is the one that I want to put at the bottom to help straighten it because of the weight of the cabin pushing down on it. This is the one that bows upwards. The same would be true if it was bowing in the opposite direction like that. I've then got a bowed timber, which is slightly bowed. I want to start off with something relatively straight as well at the bottom. I've then got a twisted timber. I've got another bowed timber that's going to help towards straightening up that twist. I've got another bowed timber that's then going in the opposite direction. I've got a twisted timber sitting on top of that bow, which is going in the opposite direction to the bow. I've got a slightly bowed timber, which is near as enough straight, which is going to be pretty much in the middle of the wall to help me straighten it up again. Another twisted timber, a mildly twisted timber, a bowed section which is going to help straighten up those twists again. Quite a large twist on that one, a bow which is going to help to straighten up that twist. Another twisted section, a mildly twisted section, another mildly twisted section, and a couple of reasonably straight boards at the top. So that's what I'm working with here. It's similar with the 3-metre walls as well, but the 4-metre wall, with it being a longer wall, these are the ones which are going to try to twist that much more, perhaps. So we'll get on with building it now. Just before we get on with building it, I will also actually remind people that you do get a spare log with all of our log cabins as well. In this case, well, in all cases, it's always the longest wall log where you get an extra spare wall log. This is the most twisted piece of timber that we have. So this is the one that actually I'm going to put to one side, and we don't even need to use it in the construction. So with that having been done, we'll now get on with building it. This one, as you can see, you can't really push it down in the middle at the moment. It's the weight of the cabin that's going to do that. So as more and more logs get put on top of it, that's when we'll be able to straighten that up and engage it with the tongues below it. Right, so with this first 3 metre wall log, actually this one's twisted already, so we will start off by clamping it on both sides, and then we straighten the timber with the clamps as we then push it down and engage it. Now sometimes you do also need to use a hammer to help push it down. So that's now engaged on the end. Now as I release it, it is tending to lift this piece of timber at the same time, but by the time we've added more bits of wood, that will stop doing that. So we'll carry on with that. So we're starting on one corner first, and then we're going to work our way along the length of the timber. So we've engaged that corner first, and we'll now work our way along the length. If you can push that and hold that down, so that's not going to disengage. And that's now fully engaged along its length. Right, if you can clamp that end of the timber and then hold it straight. I know the notch is going to hold it straight as well, but that will just help. So once again, we're using the clamps to help straighten up the timber, and that actually slotted down quite simply once I'd straightened it a little bit, so that's fine. If necessary, you can of course knock them down with the hammer. You can also find it's helpful to knock at the sides with the hammer to help line up the tongue and groove. That one's down. Oh, that one below it isn't. Okay. Yeah, no, back. Right, now whack it. There you go. So that's that one down. Yep, that's down. Okay. Right, moving on to this one. If you can just hold that down at that side. I'll straighten that up. Lock it down somewhat. Yep, there we go. And then we need to go back to that one. I think we need to take that log out actually. So as it happens, I've tried to put 2 twisted logs together on the other side of the cabin there, and it is always better to try and separate the twisted logs by using another straight board in between them, or using a bow or something that goes in a different direction. But where we've tried to put 2 twisted logs together, because they're both twisting in the same direction, there is actually too much force to be able to lock them together. So we'll separate those and we'll find a different combination. Yeah, so you'll probably find it a lot easier if you use the clamp as well. If you use the clamp at the same time, don't use it on the end. Another top tip, people, is don't use the clamps on the end of the timber very much because that's the weakest point. It's obviously after the notch. It's far better to use the clamp on the internal part inside the notch wherever possible. So if you're going to push, you should be pulling actually, because the timber's twisted in that direction, and as you twist you pull up. So yeah, that's it. So that's that one. We'll leave that one on the floor here for 2 seconds and we'll find a different lump of timber. So what else have we got? I would say that looks like a good choice. Let's go for that one. We will have to straighten it up along its length as we go, so we'll do your corner first and then we'll work in this direction. Go on, you whack that whilst I whack this, and also, yeah, there you go. Right, now knock it down from the top. Not on the end, inside the notch. Okay. Get that clamp again. Is that down and locked in? Yeah, so it is on that end, and we need to now sort it out on this end. Right, okay. Yeah, if you put your clamp on there, and we're both going to twist slightly in this direction, but be careful not to push up too much because you'll disengage it on the other end. Right, and then can you get your hammer actually, and we'll knock it along from that end towards this, so reach over as far as you can kind of thing. Yep. There we go. Right, fine, so that one's engaged. If I knock this and you knock down, from in, there we go, go on, whack it. If we hit at the same time, ready, 3, 2, 1, go. Right, we'll come back a bit in this direction. Clamp it on. And rotate like that. Okay, there you go, see. Well, we've been trying other methods as well whilst we've been going along, and another method that we've come across is to use 2 lumps of timber either side of the timber that you're trying to straighten. This helps to then straighten it in relation to the timber that's underneath it, and then obviously once that's then locked in and clamped up as much as you can tighten, it should then be a simpler method of knocking it into place. So that's that one locked down as well. Another thing you might find helpful is to have one person holding down one end of the timber whilst that's been pushed into place, whilst the other person then works on the other end, or indeed works their way along the timber to get it located all the way along. So this is one of our bowed timbers. These should be fairly simple to put into place. As you can see, it's got a substantial bow running along the length of it. We're going to push it into place in the middle. I'm going to push that down and locate it there, whilst Chris locates it on the other side, and he's just been able to push that down using his weight. And I might get a hammer to quickly locate it on the other side. So I'm going to start from the middle and work my way along. And when I get nearer to the side, I'm then going to hit these a bit more into location. Maybe use my knees a little bit or something just to help put it into place. And that's located again in there. So that's that one done. Yeah, it's a little tight on this side it is. Oh, there we go. Go on. Do you want to do your end first? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Go on, we'll do your end first. So this one's quite a twisted lump of timber. If you put your end and lock that down. Yeah? Okay. And then I'll need to twist this with the clamps. Now with this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a couple of blocks of wood and I'll clamp it either side and try and straighten it up. And drop it down a bit so it's flush with the top of the timber there. So there we go. Alright, and as I'm tightening that up, that's obviously starting to straighten the timber a bit and put it more in line with the other one. Yours in place? Yep. Yep. And so there we go, I managed to knock that one down, no problem. Right, so this one's quite a twisted piece of timber that's obviously twisting along the length of it. So we're going to use a couple of blocks of wood that have been chopped down from the packing pieces that came with the cabin. And we'll clamp those into place. That's going to help to straighten the timber in relation to the timber that's directly underneath it. And then once that's done, we hammer it into place and it locates. And then we're going to go along the line to hammer it along. And we're repositioning the timber slightly as we're doing this. Right, so this one's quite a twisted piece of timber that's obviously twisting along the length of it. So we're going to use a couple of blocks of wood that have been chopped down from the packing pieces that came with the cabin. And we'll clamp those into place. That's going to help to straighten the timber in relation to the timber that's directly underneath it. And then once that's done, we hammer it into place and it locates. So you no doubt remember that we put this board at the bottom here, which was the rather bowed board. It was bowing up by about 1.5 inches or more in the middle. And we've put 5 boards on top of it now, which we've knocked down and located. And that's sufficient weight enough to be able to push this into place and keep it located along the whole length. Go for it. So that's a fairly straight piece of timber. What I'm trying to do is intersperse the straight pieces, or fairly straight pieces at least, between the more warped or twisted ones to try and straighten the cabin wall up as a whole. So this timber's got a very slight bow in it. I've noticed whilst I've been building this wall that it's been tending to want to lean over slightly because we've had a fair amount of twisted timbers in it. Because this one is bowing in that direction, obviously if it was bowing in the other direction I'd simply spin the piece of timber round. So I've got it now bowing in this direction, which means as I put it into place, it's going to want to try to help to pull the wall inwards rather than helping to pull the wall outwards. And as it happens, that one locates rather simply. Early on also, with the very first piece that we knocked in this side wall, it was quite noticeable that this piece of timber was pulling up quite a lot. I did say that with a bit of weight that was going to stop, and now that we've put 7 boards or so onto this side, you'll notice that it stopped pulling up. The other thing that's going to happen is by the time we've got to the top of this, the apex at the very top, which goes above the doors, is going to lock everything together and pull everything together at the top in any case. So we had a rather twisted piece of timber the last time, and this time I'm going to put this rather bowed piece of timber on top of it. The twisted piece of timber was trying to make everything push outwards at one side, and this is going to hopefully bring it back again. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of bow in the middle again, and we'll just lock that into place. So if we start at your end, perhaps. Shall we get my clamps?
Yep.
Right, sorry, can you hold those for me, please, Chris? Cheers.
Yeah, should be fine.
Yep, okay.
End in.
Yep. So we'll push that one down, and I'll use this clamp on the other side as well, I think. Just try not to drop bits of wood. There we go. Sorry, can you hold these bits of wood as well for me? Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so can you hold down that? Well, yeah, if you hold down that end, and then we're going to knock it along its length. And in fact, yes, it's locked in already. So there we go, that's that one done. Okay, so this piece of timber is again reasonably twisted, I would say, along its length. It is only a 3-metre piece of timber, this as well. So if it were 5 metres long or 5.5 metres, it could perfectly reasonably be twisted to a greater degree than this, because the length of timber is that much more. But Chris, if you knock that end down, thank you very much. Then we'll get my blocks of wood again on this side. And sorry, if you can grab these for me again. Thanks. And that's probably located already. Yeah, okay, so there we go. There we go. These are the short returns that go on either side of the door. Because they're shorter lumps of timber, they're generally not as twisted as the longer ones anyway. They have a bit of a twist on these particular ones as it happens. It could be a little worse than this, certainly. But in any case, the door frame that's going to go into this is going to then act to straighten it up, because it's a U-frame, essentially, of the door, which is going to slot over this and act to straighten the boards up as it goes into place. Here's another twisted board on our back wall. You can see that's obviously got a fair old angle at this side, whilst Chris has managed to knock it down straight on the other side there. And we obviously need to straighten that in order to lock it down. So again, I shall turn to my trusty lumps of timber, clamps and hammer. Yeah. Oh, has that one popped out? Okay. Sometimes they pop out at the other end, so it's best to try and hold them in place at both ends in order to try and locate them. Bend your fingers. And the other method of doing it is just to put your weight down onto the board and push it down. So that's that one. As we were hitting down the timber boards above this point, we were knocking them a little bit unevenly, and so it's actually popped out at the bottom, near the bottom logs here. because there's a fair amount of weight now sitting down on top of this, it's not actually too much of a problem to try and relocate these. We're going to use our trusty hammers to try and push it back into line, and then just push it down basically. So I'll use 2 pairs of hands. So there we go, just a bit of weight and a bit of tapping and it's back into place again. So as we were knocking this piece of timber into place, we were hitting things a little bit too hard, and it's actually broken off the end of one of the notches. That's not a major issue actually, as it happens. What we're going to end up doing is just drilling through that, sticking a screw through it, and we'll lock it into place. You'll never really tell that it's been knocked off, and that's a simple way to fix it. So first we'll pre-drill it. And then we screw it into place. Now this is actually a lot easier to do